Well, apologies there for that breaking the interview with Dr. Reku Bro. We will bring that to you later on, but there's a need for us to expand the conversation. I guess the point is made. The caution out there that we may be getting back to the dark days of doom. So joining me now via Zoom is Deputy Energy Minister Andrew Ejapa-Mensah, who's helping us to break down the issues and also get government's perspective on this. Thank you, sir, for your time. So you've heard not entirely the conversation, but I guess you get the great drift of Dr. Reku Brobe when he says that the signs are clear. We are getting closer and closer to once more an energy crisis. What's your take on that point that he's made?
Well, let me say good afternoon to your viewers. I wonder the basis of my very senior Dr. Charles Reku Brobe's assertion. Because obviously, if you listen to the press briefing that my minister, the Honorable Dr. Matthew Poku-Prepe, gave last month, where he indicated that as of 2021, we had an installed generation capacity of 5,367 megawatts. And that the peak, demand for that period is 3,246. One wonders how anybody can then suggest that the signs are clear that we are heading for doom. So, of course, on that day, he indicated that the peak that had been recorded for this year was 3,469. And on that day, the available capacity was 3,861, which people have then suggested that if you do a simple subtraction of the 3,469 from the 3,861, you are left with some 400 megawatts that was available on the day. That then suggests that at any point where any of the plants go off, we were likely to have doom so. Clearly, that is a misunderstanding of how the electricity generation space operates. Indeed, on every material bill, nominations are made and specific plants are asked to come on, and obviously, based on that, GRICO then dispatches the least cost, what we call the merit order dispatch. Indeed, I can confirm to you that Mary, for example, for over a year, even though it's in good shape, because of the excess capacity that we've always been mentioning, it's never been turned on one day. But that 250 megawatts is available. What the ministry has then decided to do is to move that plant to Amomaso in the Ashanti region, just so that they can help with grid stability. And so if you have sight of all the issues that are within the space and you conclude that we are looking at imminent doom, so that conclusion really is not borne out by the fact. Yes, I agree that if you look at the growth projection in the demand forecast, we will get to a point where our installed capacity would all be demanded.
In fact, I was just about pointing that out because the Electricity Company of Ghana, for instance, talks about that in their proposal to PURC. They give clear indications that we may be exhausting that. So, yes, indeed, it appears that
that's pretty obvious. And so question is, are there plans in place to incrementally add on to our capacity, which we estimate, that by 2026, 27, if we do not add any capacity, then obviously we'll be in doom so. And so, if that is the suggestion, that if you look at the demand, it may be time for us to begin the conversation so that because the plants take 2-3 years to actually get completed, begin the conversation so that by the time that the installed capacity that we have today is actually exhausted, we'll be in a position to then depend on new ones that are coming. Then I will say yes. But if the suggestion is that, and I heard him say based on recent happenings, okay, and the attribution is that because we had some outages, especially over the weekend, which Gridco has explained. And clearly, if you have some fall in pressure of the gas delivery system infrastructure, that then impacts the output end, you would have some equipment going off, which will trigger the kind of issues that we experienced over the weekend. But like Gridco explained, when the gas came back up, they restored power incrementally until it got ramped up.
So basically what you're telling us is that Dumsor, we're nowhere closer to Dumsor.
But of course, the Minister of Energy assured Ghanaians only last month that we are nowhere near Dumsor, and that anybody who is thinking that because of the Dumsor program that we are running, okay, improvement in our transmission infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, that increasingly we are looking for funds to fix some of them. If those lead to outages and you conclude that that is Dumsor, then obviously that amounts to wishful thinking, because
in fact,
sufficient enough capacity in place,
right?
And government is also beginning the conversation that then ensures that the period 2012-2016 incidents that we had does not recur again in our country.
Yeah, I mean, for the sake of time, I would have played back to you the concern about Dr. Reku Brobe on that. He talks about the fact that these kinds of excuses, as he's calling them, that we're seeing from your ministry is untenable.
But of course, I mean, what will be the basis for his assertion?
Well,
that these are excuses?
His assertion may not be strange. But just hold on for me. Let me build on the point.
Yeah, sure.
Right. His assertion may not be strange, particularly when we know, and there are more revelations coming through from the ECG in terms of the proposal they're tabling before PURC. They are making even some very damning remarks on the Energy Ministry and by extension government. We'll just show you excerpts of that. We'll just show you excerpts of that. Let's bring that on the screens now, talking about what it is that ECG has been talking about in terms of indebtedness by government. They talk about, and you have that on your screens right now, the indebtedness to ECG, and there you have it. They're talking about the fact that it is undeniable that government recently made some payments to defray the cost which both ministries, department, and agencies owe government, the issue about street lights and all of that. But however, and that's the point I want you to respond to, the full amount granted as COVID-19 relief by government is yet to be settled. And we know that, for instance, in 2019, you paid just 4 million Ghana cedis out of, look at the total amount, 1.8 million, some 1.8 billion, which you owe the, of course, ECG. And then they go to talk about how much you owe the IPPs as well. If you look at the fraction of how much you're paying, clearly, we could say that government is not doing well in terms of offsetting the debt to ECG. That could also cripple our power sector. You agree?
You see, you need to read the entirety of the statement that ECG is putting out there in its proper context.
But okay. You haven't paid. You haven't paid the amount.
Well, the Ministry of Finance, I'm sure, can speak to it. Okay, because I'm not aware that COVID relief that government granted to ECG have not been paid.
No,
I haven't seen.
I mean that will be strange, because obviously that policy was coordinated by your ministry. This is the Electricity of Ghana writing to PRC on the basis for which they are asking for an upward adjustment.
But if there is an indebtedness, okay, and you know your debtor,
yeah,
how does that become basis for increases in tariffs?
But
that's why I said you need to read the entirety of the document in context.
Right.
Okay. Yes. There is a running account that government of Ghana and ECG operate. Sometimes ECG's own shortfalls, okay, in their inability to generate requisite enough revenue to pay the IPPs, is supplemented by government. Okay, and so let's distinguish whatever obligations that they are with ECG and the fact that there is sufficient enough generation.
But I guess, Honorable, I guess it's not about, I guess the capacity may not necessarily be in question now. It's about
but
return
ECG
on investment and
ECG
then paying for the power that
electricity.
But the point
I'm saying to you that the what your producer said to me was that Dr. Rekugobe has made some assertion to the effect that there was imminent doom so. And I'm saying to you that if you look at the data, that assertion is not supported by the facts. And I've said to you that notwithstanding, government in its wisdom and having regard to the Energy Commission's own demand forecast is having conversations with independent power producers to ensure that incremental capacity is added so that by the time we get to the point where the presently installed capacity is consumed, we have sufficient enough generation to meet the demands of our consumers. You are mixing that up with ECG electricity distributor, these obligations that he is claiming government owes them. And I'm saying that distinguish the two.
No, but it's a supply chain, you agree.
Does not in any way impact the generation capacity of this country.
But
that's not the point that I'm making.
It's a supply chain. Doomsor may not necessarily return because of the generational capacity. It may also be due to some other challenges which also border on indebtedness. You agree?
Such as.
Precisely. And that's why I'm saying it's a supply chain. If one side of the...
It's not a question of supply chain. Yes. ECG as the distributor, they are the ones that generate the revenue at the consumer and then user point, for which everybody else within the value chain is paid. But I'm saying that in itself is distinguishable from actual generation being available. If you're saying that, yes, there is sufficient enough generation, but because you owe ECG, they are unable to pay the generators to generate the power for them to distribute. That's a conversation that we can have. But the point still remains that does not impact generation per se.
Right. So at what point do you personally feel that Doomsor could come back?
Well, I do not foresee that we're going to have Doomsor anytime soon. I do not foresee that the conversations that are actually ongoing today would lead to Doomsor anytime within the foreseeable future. Like I indicated, PURC, the Energy Commission has demand forecast that because it's the energy sector regulator, okay, then projects additional generation capacity that government from time to time ought to add to the generation mix. We are following that strictly and would ensure as a ministry that there are no gaps that would then lead to generational deficiency that then would result in lack of electricity for our consumers. That I can assure you is exactly what it is that we are doing.
Andrew, don't you feel that you're focusing too much on generational capacity? You're looking at one side of the coin and not necessarily the concern about energy or power supply. That's also a critical aspect that will keep the lights on, you agree? Because if ECG is not distributing the energy that is being generated, clearly there'll be a big challenge.
I agree with you that there has to be a focus on the distribution bit as well, okay? And I'm not saying that that's not important. But you recall that consistently we've said that Ghana's problem is not generation. People have disputed it. And the suggestion that Dr. Rekugobe is putting out there is that our problem necessarily is generation. So the question that you ask in itself addresses the point that we have made consistently, that it is not a question about generation, but sustainability. And so if ECG is unable to generate the requisite revenue on the ground to pay the grid company which transmits the power to them, to pay the power generators that then generates the power and transmits, then you have a situation where you have generation, but you will not have supply. But I'm saying that in itself is what we are working to avert. And so all the issues that we've had over the weekend clearly cannot be attributable to ECG's inability to provide power, okay, because there's lack of generation. The reason that others are tagging as excuses are actually technical problems that indeed arose over the weekend. I was in my constituency when the lights went off. So I went onto our platform and saw the report that had put out there with respect to the offshore receiving facility at Sanzuli, okay, which then brings gas from the ENI field. That had a low pressure problem, and so they couldn't have the generation, the requisite gas to power the pump, okay? So that had to be resolved, and the pressure increased for the generators to generate, and some of the plants were shifted onto light crude and all that. So I'm saying that if we're having a conversation that distinguishes clearly what the generational situation is, let us do so. And if anybody thinks that because of ECG's inability, and of course, you and I know that there are technical and commercial losses in the region of about 30% of the revenue that is seeking to, is supposed to collect. And so what measures are being put in place to ensure that ECG generates the sufficient enough revenue to pay its bills? It's exactly what the Energy Sector Recovery Program has sought to do, that increasingly we are resolving the issues and the challenges in that space.
And today, we're being told by the ECG that PURC would have to look into their concerns and do an upward adjustment of tariffs by some 148%. I mean, Ghanaians will be concerned about that as well.
It's surprising to me that we are harping on ECG's wish list, as if to say consistently over the years they do not ask for percentage increases in that region or even more. But the question then is, after the assessment and evaluation by PURC, are these requests approved? Look at the data. You would see that in from 2010 through to 2021, every year ECG goes with, every time that there's a major tariff review, which is every 3 years, they go with a plethora of demands, but the PURC hardly ever grants those requests. In fact, in 2019, there was actually a reduction, okay, of some 30% for non-residential consumers and 12% or so for residential consumers, okay? And so let the PURC evaluate the proposal that have been submitted to them, let them do the stakeholder engagements, and then come out with an approved tariff that then we can begin to have a conversation on whether indeed it is 148% increase that is being put out there.
Yeah.
As if to say that merely submitting proposals amount to an approval. It's not.
Well, that's not our basis, but you also don't work for PURC.
That's been the narrative out there.
Well, yes, we know that.
This morning I've had cause to speak on several media houses, and I've said to the host that, look, yes, these are proposals that, and indeed, Joy FM admitted when I sent a message to one of your colleagues there that yes, they have added a caveat that, well, these are proposals from ECG.
Right, and it's a proposal
from the record, from the data, it is not their proposals that end up being what it is that the PURC necessarily approves.
Well,
so
it's a proposal. I get that fact. It's a proposal to PURC, I understand. But you are not in a position to determine for PURC what steps they may take on this. We don't know what the outcome it will be. But clearly we're saying that Ghanaians may pay some more for power in the coming days. That's clear. And that's what you're responsible for.
Not necessarily. Because you see,
beyond that, we're learning now that a significant part of the problem has got to do with government's indebtedness. And they're pointing that out to us. You can't contest that fact, can you?
I'm saying to you that every month as I sit in this energy ministry, I see ECG bills, shortfalls in generational payments that the Ministry of Finance is paying. Every month. I see fuel bills that are submitted through the Ministry of Energy to the Ministry of Finance to pay. So, like I said, and without being sounding repetitive, I've indicated that ECG and the government of Ghana have a running account that they operate, okay? And so you may have to do some reconciliation to see where exactly this so-called obligation that ECG claims covered funds that were relief that government gave in 2020 has not been paid. I'm not in a position to either confirm or deny that data, but I'm saying that if that were even to be the case, ECG's obligations are paid by the Ministry of Finance on a regular basis, and that cannot in itself be a basis for them asking for increases in tariffs.
But you know how much of a toll that would have on ECG, for instance, is if we have everyone using power for free. That was what happened.
But of course, debt is debt. Debt doesn't mean that somebody is using power for free.
In terms of the magnitude, it
if the person owes you except that the person hasn't paid, that is not free. Look, you see, if you listen to the press briefing once again that my minister granted last month, you will see in there that for every 100 units of electricity that ECG sells, they are unable to account and or collect 30%. Okay? And so you ought to begin to introduce operational efficiency into the ECG space to make sure that all that money that goes out that they cannot either account for or collect is collected. And that's exactly what it is that we are working with them. And I'm sure that the PURC would give them the KPIs that then ensure that they're able to meet those targets. Okay. Again, question as to whether I lost my thought there. But the point that I'm making is that whatever it is that the issues with ECG are, those are separate and distinct from the generation capacity that the country has. And those themselves are separate and distinct and cannot be the basis for them asking for increases in tariffs. Indeed, what the Ministry of Energy is proposing, okay, and ECG themselves admit that because of the punitive nature, if you like, of the tariff structure that they operate, where high energy consumers are charged more, that in itself does not, if you like, encourage consumption. So that in the regime where we have excess capacity, where we are to ensure that all that capacity is consumed, because of the prohibitive nature of the tariffs, people do not, especially industry, resort to alternative sources of energy to power their plants. What we are proposing is for us to have a flat out tariff regime, okay, that then ultimately makes the energy cheaper and encourage people to consume. Obviously, if the energy is cheaper or it's affordable, then the incidents where people would want to undercut, do illegal connection and all sorts of things are likely to reduce. And when that happens, the tendency would be for us to see some operational improvement in ECG's collection rate. And that is exactly what we are advocating, I'm sure, that the PURC, based on all the analysis that I've seen, would look to what it is that the suggestions from us are and approve it so that we have a much more sane environment where ECG can operate and collect their revenues to meet its operational expenditures.
I'm glad that you're making that point because your ministry supervises ECG, for instance. There's a report on state-owned enterprises and how they are underperforming by SIGA. SIGA talks about the fact that ECG is among some of these organizations that's not doing well. So how come that you're piling on to the debt situation of that company, particularly when we know that you've gone in for a rapid credit facility from the World Bank to deal with the exigencies of COVID? You've not allocated the portion that you gave out for free electricity to ECG. That's not fair to the company, is it?
Well, I'm not in a position to confirm or deny that assertion because I know that there's the Ministry of Finance that was responsible for making those subsidy, or if you like, payments to ECG. And so we may have to confirm from the Ministry of Finance whether those figures that are put out there are actually what it is that they are.
But it's your word against that of the ECG. ECG is saying you have not paid us.
But
I mean, at least if we pay our bills, I guess if we pay our bills, ECG definitely gives us a receipt. So if you've not paid them,
you should remember that I have a legal background, and so I choose my words quite carefully.
But you supervise this.
I'm not in a position to confirm or deny. That is not challenging anybody's figures. I say we may have to confirm from the Ministry of Finance whether the figures that have been put out there, because I'm not in a position to confirm at this material moment.
At the time you were formulating the policy, obviously you were in the know that government was going to give electricity for free. What were you earmarking in terms of funding for that project?
But of course, in the midst of the COVID, did you expect government to do anything else than to provide relief to the citizens of this country who, for most part, were not working, who, for most part, were under lockdown, or for some part of the year were under a lockdown, who, for most part, had lost their livelihoods arising out of the ravages of COVID? And so it was important for government to act, for government to provide relief, for government to support its citizens and protect their lives and livelihoods. And so if a decision was taken to provide free electricity for a period of time, free water, that people's lives depended on, do you really have a problem with that? Of course, if there are some outstanding obligations, like I said, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, ECG, as I sit here, every month, bills that ECG owes IPPs are paid by the Ministry of Finance. The other day, you heard the Vice President indicate that 17 billion odd Ghana cedis had been made for and on behalf of ECG, arising out of excess capacity contracts that they had signed. And so how you want to relate that relief that government gave as basis for so-called non-performance of ECG is really baffling to me.
No, I'm not the one making the points. ECG is the one making that assertion. They are saying it's
ECG,
affecting power supply.
ECG,
I'm not the one making the point.
ECG said, situate that comment in context. Was that the only issue that ECG identified for which they were requesting PURC to approve tariff increases for them?
But in
obviously not.
In the end, it's about money. If ECG doesn't have
but
the money,
of course, that's not the only issue. So don't make it look as if it's the only issue. There were a plethora of issues that ECG identified, pursuant to which they are making a request. Of course, if you're going to an economic regulator to make a justification for increases in tariffs, obviously they would put out issues that they think may suit their narrative. But there are other technical issues that the PURC would evaluate before it comes up with any approval or otherwise that they would give for whatever tariff increases that they would grant.
But in the end, even if we look at the technical considerations, it will still come back to you at the Energy Ministry. For instance, you're talking about technical losses, losses in supply, which is being pegged somewhere around 30%. All of these issues are obviously of matters bordering on policy. How to deal with wastage in the system. Government agencies as well are using power which they are not paying for. These are all issues that still come back to you at the ministry.
Absolutely. And no doubt at all. You recall that it was government policy to, if you like, privatize some aspect of ECG's operations. Okay, and so the PDS transaction that then, because of some contractual breaches, if you like, led to government terminating that agreement. Okay, and so very recently, boundary between program has been launched that then ensures that ECG is able to account for the power that comes into its operational jurisdictions. Okay, they've piloted the special business unit that then defines a particular scope that would lead to some efficiencies. And so we're looking to scale that up and introduce some private sector participation, okay, in their billing and collections and space.
All right, then.
Okay, but that's all work in progress that will require cabinet approvals before they are implemented.
And
okay,
so what will
the
be
management system has been rolled out that then allows communication between their meters. There's the task force that was launched very recently that is going about helping with the debt recovery and all that. So a multiplicity of issues are being rolled out to, as it were, resolve the problems of ECG. But we are all clear in our minds that some private sector intervention, because we all saw the operational performance and the rate of collection when PDS was introduced into ECG's operations for the 8-month period. Okay, and what has happened post the termination of that agreement. But it's early days yet, and I believe that when the decisions are taken, the good people of this country would be apprised of what it is that government intends to do to ensure that ECG is put on some sound financial footing.
And part of that is that we're privatizing again?
I said that there was going to be some private sector participation,
right?
Some aspect of the operations of ECG. That's the ticket to you that will require approvals, and it's early days yet. I didn't get your name because you are want to try to read something into what people say. But I mean, there's no opaqueness with whatever it is that we are doing here. All the conversations that we are having are pretty much open, transparent, and when the decisions are taken and firmed up, like I said, Ghanaian people will be apprised of where it is that government intends to go with ECG.
All right, then. Andrew, my name is Blessed, but what's your message to Ghanaians out there? Yes, precisely.
Very well. Good.
So your message to Ghanaians as we wrap up on this conversation?
Well, I think that the Ghanaians should be assured, so as we knew it, it's a thing of the past. I can say categorically, without any fear of contradiction, that all the naysayers who are preaching imminent doom really is not borne out by the facts as I see them. Okay, and the documents are available.
All right.
Yes, there are few of the plans that are installed, like T3 that is not available, that government is working to put it back on. But if you look at the broad scope of the generation capacity that we have, there's sufficient enough power to feed the demand. But yes, going forward, there's a need to do an incremental addition that is consistent with the projections that the Energy Commission has made. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no doom that is imminent.
All right, then. I'm grateful that you've been able to join us. That's the Deputy Energy Minister, Andrew Ejapa.